Hello again. Welcome to the program. I am Suren. Contemplating or just studying the cosmic and other space-related issues can have strange effects on some people. Immanuel Kant, who was a great advocate and exponent of pure reason, concludes, by way of Newtonian physics, that the inhabitants of the other planets of the solar system must have bodies of lighter material and nimbler minds than inhabitants of the inner planets. And he suggested that sin was possible only on Earth because other beings were either too dumb or too evolved to be capable of it. A century before, Kant, another great thinker, who was no other than Blaise Pascal, looking up to the heavens, uttered probably the best known of his phrases. Return in silence of these infinite places frightens me. By way of contrast, here is a phrase by Yuri Gagarin, the Russian astronaut who in 1961 became the very first man in space. I felt like diving into this ocean, he says, and swimming to the horizon where earth and sky meet. Kant's notions, Pascal's existential fear, and Gagarin's boyish fascination were perhaps the typical reactions to awareness of the cosmic. Realizing that infinity and eternity are discouraging concepts for a creature living on what is little more than a speck of galactic dust for a brief moment of time, with a hunger to know whether he is a freak or an excellent person. Fear, fascination, and fantasy are the very human reactions to this situation. What frightened Pascal was the thought of the ultimate aloneness and meaninglessness of human life. But his very next noteworthy phrase was, "How many kingdoms do not know us?" Obviously, to his is not a question, but an exclamation, if one notices, or rather, an anguished cry. In Pascal's day, there was no foreseeable chance of ever establishing contact with any other cosmic civilization. But since then, the situation has changed. Then, one tends to ask, what do space flights promise mankind? Gagarin asks, and he gives you the answer. They will help us in revealing many secrets of nature, which scientists the world over are striving to discover, and to reply to the question, which is agitating us all: does life exist outside the earth? Anything that man gets agitated about, and indeed anything that engages and polarizes his emotions, as the idea of the existence of alien life and intelligence is surely worth investigating. Einstein is reported to have said of UFO sightings, these people have seen something. What these people have seen, I do not know, and care less. His attitude was surely uncommon. It was perhaps typical of the scientist, who has no means of scientifically getting to grips with the UFO problem. But to admit that people must have seen something and not to care what that something is does seem a rather severe renunciation of natural human curiosity and alien to the prescribed scientific method of truth. Modern studies have tended to narrow the gap between man and other mammals. But man is endowed with an immense curiosity and passion for discovery and exploration that still sets him apart from other mammals. No doubt, the great man was plagued by people eager to tell him things about the universe that he did not know, and he may have been feeling a little worried when he uttered his words. But whatever the cause of it, it expressed an attitude of indifference that few people convinced of the authenticity of reports of things in the sky would share. Let us be very frank about modern science, because it denies by all means any interest in the existence of things of the spiritual kind, or the alleged direct influence of a god on human minds. And in addition to this, extraterrestrial influence machines manipulated by other beings. Most obvious is described as the projection of signals from within one's memories, or the storage of memories onto noise, and hence hearing or seeing what one wants to hear and see, rather some objectively existing spirit or God. To prove the existence of something, one must first present the evidence of that something and its existence acceptable to other minds. The non-existence theory speaks. Thus, as long as one assumes the non-existence of something, one will assume that the signals from the something either do not exist, or are noise, or are created in another human mind, or come from some mindless process in nature. Therefore, if an unknown mind without a visible, detectable body sends signals, we can only ignore them, repress memories of having received them, attribute them to noise or to a mindless but systematically varying source, or say that they are the results of faulty operation of the observer. Jonathan Swift said, "Happiness is the perpetual possession of being well deceived. Since his day, understanding of the mechanisms of self-deception by means of which man secure happiness has become highly sophisticated. It has been demonstrated that it is an innate property of man's mind to seek to order the teeming inputs of the senses into coherent and meaningful patterns. Patterns that may be determined by personal or cultural dictates. These are scientific insights into the processes of human perception and cognition, and in an inquiry into a subject so evocative of fears and hopes in men as alien intelligence. It would be wrong to ignore them. Although fears, hopes, and bold speculations may have no part to play in the process of scientific investigation, they are a major part and the very stuff of the literature. So, on the principle that imagination is a necessary component of man's truth, that is, truth-seeking faculty, and we shall not avoid the insights and imaginings of science fiction writers if they are throwing some light on the subject under consideration. Science fiction has come a very long way since the 17th century. Such fantasies, together with logical extrapolations from human experience, such as Wells' The War of the Worlds and the extraterrestrial gothic horrors and monstrosities projected in popular but ephemeral literature in magazines, were long staple of science fiction. But in recent decades, the genre has come of age, becoming a medium for some of the most brilliant and sustained philosophical speculation, as well as some of the boldest and best informed scientific speculation on the subject of alien intelligence. Can one deny the fact that the Copernican and Darwinian revolutions administered successive blows to human self-esteem, and that with the former man lost his throne, and with the latter his soul as well, as one writer has put it, where it is remarked often. But the beneficial effects of these revolutionary changes and human thoughts have received a rather less attention. Apart from the fact that it cannot be but beneficial and salutary for the human mind to have to exercise its self in accommodating and accepting the reality. The Copernican revolution gave man the idea of the possible existence of other worlds which are inhabited, and the Darwinian revolution and the biological discoveries that emanated from it gave him the idea of the possibility of the existence of other intelligent species. These were the ideas without which speculative science fiction could scarcely have got off the ground. What are we to understand when we use the word alien? It is the definition of the term which will not be confused with issues of parochialism or narrow-mindedness. So let us question, alien to what? Let us therefore consider to our physical human persons of the planet Earth. This implies that there may be persons that are A, not human, B, not physical, or C, not terrestrial. And a little later, we may consider the existence and possible existence of persons of these categories. Of course, if you hold that the terms human being and person are synonymous, then these propositions will be nonsensical. But it is arguable that by regarding them as synonymous and by regarding them and himself as unique in qualifying as a person, man may have cut himself off from experiences of communication with other beings, from which he could have derived enrichment, enhancement, and perhaps instruction. The proposition put forward by the philosopher Roland Piketty that although human beings are persons, not all persons need to be human, is not only a more generous and productive view that human species chauvinism, but it is also more intelligent. And now, we need to define intelligence once more. Intelligence manifests itself in the way that a creature interacts with its environment. It is a variable both between species and within species. Species-specific behaviors, instinctive actions, and reactions common to all members of a species, which generally have to do with feeding, sex, or predator-prey relations, are indisputably intelligent behaviors in the sense that they are not random, but are directed towards a particular goal. But as a rule, such behaviors are not intelligent in the sense that they are performed as a result of deliberation, foresight, or choice. Now, we may consider certain creatures proportionately more intelligent insofar as they are capable of modifying their instinctive behavior. They may do this, for instance, to adapt to changing circumstances or environment, to secure some long-term interest, or in observance of some abstract principle. In fact, these three types of modification of instinctive behavior could be said to be manifestations of progressively higher degrees of intelligence. They show an increasing degree of detachment from the inadequate and immediate. Intelligence then is a function that takes place between stimulus and response, or to use computer terminology, it is the information progressing or processing that which goes on between input and output. The more information there is to process, the more powerful and sophisticated we consider the intelligent function. A simple sensory input and motor output sequence, such as migratory behavior, prompted by the autumnal shortening of the light, requires minimal information processing. But to listen to a symphony or read a book, then discuss it at length, requires a great deal. In the latter case, the input, information processed, consists not only of the immediate sensory input, but also to use, or what are known in computer terminology as stored programs, which would be, for instance, the application of standards learned and remembered, other works of literature or music recalled and compared, and acquired personal predilections and judgments. Whether there are ranges of intelligence spectrum, as there are of the electromagnetic spectrum, there are beyond us. If higher intelligences do exist, our position with regard to their works would presumably be similar to that of a native trying to understand one of our artifacts, for instance, like a mobile phone or color television set. They may well manifest in our world and experience in apparently random events. The question of whether we may infer the existence of an alien and higher intelligence from certain categories of apparently random events that occur in our world in one that we shall take during the later part of this program. But in the first area of reference is made to a contact with an alien intelligence, which has an interesting implication for our whole inquiry. Imagine now our contact is a chimpanzee learning to communicate with men and with each other using the sign language. This contact would enable the animal to develop a potential it could otherwise have never been able to possess. It is also possible that other kinds of contact would enable man likewise to develop innate dormant potentialities, is perhaps the most compelling reason for pursuing an inquiry into the subject of alien intelligence. And now we are encouraged to inquire, what about the extraterrestrial encounters? One of the best tales of close encounters with extraterrestrial beings is that of Betty and Barney Hill. Maybe one of the best to consider, for they have not been aware of having had a close encounter like this before, and certainly did not even attempt to exploit it. The full story emerged only by chance, sometime after the incident, and subsequent research turned up a number of facts that seemed to authenticate it. The Hills, a racially mixed couple, were returned from a holiday in Canada in September 1961, by memory. It was a note, and they were driving along a lonely road in New Hampshire when they noticed a brightly luminous object in the sky ahead of them. It came clearer as it approached them, and in order to observe it better, Barney stopped the car and got out, taking with him a pair of binoculars. He became alarmed when the object came closer still and swooped down towards them. He could see that it was some sort of craft. It had flashing lights and 2 rows of portholes through which uniformed figures with strange eyes were peering down at him. But he rushed back to his car and drove away as quickly as he could. 2 hours later, he was 35 miles farther along his route, and neither he nor his wife had any recollection of what had happened during the intervening period of time. Reports that the sighting of the UFO to the nearby Paisley Air Force Base and to the Independent UFO Research Organization, a National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Some days after the experience, Betty started having disturbing dreams, and for some time, both she and Barney manifested symptoms of physical and mental distress, which eventually led to their being referred to a Boston psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon. Dr. Simon Rohan hypnotized Betty and Barney, I should say, in order to find out what had happened during the 2 hours between the time of fleeing from the UFO and finding themselves 35 miles nearer home. Under hypnosis, the couple produced accounts with many corresponding details of how they had been abducted aboard the UFO, subjected to a medical examination, then released after being given a post-hypnotic suggestion that they should forget all about the experience. They have described the people they had abducted them. Betty said they were about 5 feet tall, had large chests, long noses, broad foreheads, eyes like those of cats, dark hair, and greyish skin. Barney described them as having large heads, tapering down to the chin, eyes that were elongated around the sides of their heads, thin and straight lips, slits in the face for nostrils, and greyish, almost metallic-looking skin. Betty said she had the impression that there were two different types of beings, and that the leader and medical examiner were distinct was from the crew members, which may explain why her description differed from Barney's in some details. Their accounts corresponded, though in stating that they had had a medical examination which apparently included some kind of sex-related test. Barney said that the aliens had done something in the region of his groin and lower abdomen, and Betty reported that she had had a long needle inserted into her navel. The fact that under hypnosis the Hills independently recalled the same sequence of events and many corresponding details from the lost 2 hours of their lives has been taken by believers in the extraterrestrial visitation as this hypothesis as positive proof that the landing and the abduction actually took place. Dr. Simon, however, was not persuaded of this and took the view that the entire episode was a creation of Betty Hill's subconscious mind. Barney, in Dr. Simon's view, had acquired the details of the event through Betty's telling him about the nightmares she had started having a few days after their experience. This would appear to be a rational explanation of the correspondences between the two accounts. And it could be argued that the Hills' need for psychiatric treatment was not a product of their experience, but existed prior to it, and that the reported incident was a shared hallucination. On the other hand, their accounts corresponded remarkably in some details with other close encounter reports with which they could not have been acquainted. Furthermore, as Jacques Vallée discovered, when he investigated the case, military radar had picked up an anomalous object in the sky at precisely the time and place of the Hills' reported experience. As usual with UFO sighting or encounter stories, when all the facts and theories are taken into account, we find ourselves left with irreducible ambiguity. Within known UFO stories, there are uncanny similarities and numerous tales manifesting remarkable correspondences, which imply some kind of objective reality must be involved. Many of the stories suggest that the Earth and its flora and fauna including human beings, are being systematically studied by somebody. There are stories of strange little men being found stealing vegetables, flowers, barks, and mosses, farm tools, and even clothes from washing lines, and making off in flying machines as soon as they are seen. For many years there existed the idea, which has been called a flying saucer psychosis, that stories told newspapers or books excite people's imaginations and thus generate more stories, and that the generation of such stories is symptomatic of the stresses, fears, anxieties, and frustrated aspirations of modern man, would appear more plausible. If this is the case, however, one would expect to find that psychological and sociological analysis of significant numbers of people who claim to have seen or encountered UFOs and their occupants reveal common characteristics. For instance, what would one expect the majority of reports to emanate from areas where the incidence of psychosis is relatively high, namely areas of high population density, and one would expect the typical person involved to be unstable, highly imaginative, and probably rather irresponsible. If such common characteristics were found among reporters of UFO sightings, the probability that the phenomenon was purely psychological would be enhanced. There have been too few scientific studies along these lines, but one has been undertaken and published by Jacques Vallée based on 200 reported landings in 1954, the majority of them in France. The analysis produces some very interesting findings. Vallée reported French landings on a map and found that they tended to be in sparsely populated areas. Indeed, Paris and its environs, where 1/3 of the population of France lived, and where the incidence of psychosis would be expected to be relatively high, did not contribute a single report. There was a total of 624 persons at the time connected with the sightings, with a roughly equal distribution of men, women, and children. Most witnesses were family men and women who held steady jobs and offered positions of social responsibility. Less than half of the observations were made by only one witness, and in 18 of the cases, people who had no connection with each other and independently reported observing the same phenomena on Furthermore, sightings tended to cluster in groups of 3 or 4 with a very small areas over a specific period of time. And there were notable correspondences in the witnesses' description of the UFOs and their occupants. All descriptions of the latter were of human or humanoid creatures, and 1/3 of them made the point that they were of exceptionally short stature. Vallée does not canvass extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis and his report, but he does rather effectively demolish the psychological hypothesis and establish the existence of a cluster of hard facts that are not to be so plausibly explained away. The observations of landed UFOs and their occupants and the reports of their experiences given by contactees would be the most interesting and important documents of our time. In the 1950s, scientists and intelligent people generally were deferred from giving the UFO phenomenon a serious consideration, but the outrageous claims and fantasies promulgated by a number of contactees, some of whom might have been quite sincere pseudo-religious cranks, although others were undoubtedly opportunists, crashing in on the human appetite for science and wonders. The observations of landed UFOs and the occupants and the reports of the experiences is given by contactees would be the most interesting and important documents of all times, if the extraterrestrial visitations are exactly as they are told about. One fact that argues in favor of the authenticity of the experiences of such people as the Barney Hills, Villas-Boas, and Maurice Basset is that they made no attempt to publicize or exploit their experiences. The whole phenomenon was certainly of psychological and sociological interest, but it did not help the cause of serious research into ufology, for the feelings in which the contactees were held by the intelligence rubbed off on any of the latter who ventured to profess a scientific interest in the subject. Consequently, the important question of whether or not there really were things in our skies that were not of terrestrial origin was generally considered to be disqualified from serious investigation by its very preponderance. The defense forces of the advanced nations could not, however, afford to be so dismissive. During World War II, many Allied pilots had reported strange disc-shaped objects which followed or flew alongside them. At first, it was thought that there might be enemy secret weapons, for the Allies did not know that German or Japanese pilots were having the same experiences. However, it soon became clear that the Foo Fighters, as they were called, were not hostile. Soon after the war, American intelligence became curious about a number of reports of mysterious cigar-shaped objects in the skies, for the thought that these might be developments of Russian military technology. But again, investigations were curtailed when the phenomenon seemed not to constitute any threat to security. But when people started seeing unidentified flying objects in the skies, the interest of the Defense Department was definitely aroused. With that, I shall wish you a very good time. We will meet again by the next episode, and we'll continue with our interesting subject. I would like to ask you now a question. What is the worst thing that could happen when you approach someone at a party What is the worst thing that could happen when you are addressing a group of people, presentation, or speech? Don't let fear get in the way. Reframe everything to being within your capability and means. If you are lucky, that's lucky enough to be in good health, be glad, be grateful, and be confident. Thank you for spending this time with me. Keep smiling and be happy.